Hello. How you doing, Erica?
I'm good, Ed. How are you? I'm well, I should say.
You're well. Good. I'm trying to check out something, Erica, because I want to double check on something because I think I don't want to say the wrong thing because then I'll be just as bad.
That's important.
That's important.
Get your facts
okay?
straight.
So I'm looking. This is a message for 2017 that I'm reading. Hold on. And I'm looking here. Bloom, 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 bloom. Bloom, 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 bloom. Keep your doors locked. Do not explain. Okay. So I've got to look this. I've got to do some more research here. The big thing, of course, is this headline about the increased security concern. So, I think I just want to make sure because, a lot of times these things are not done contextually. So I got it, but I have to double research.
Okay.
Because
you
first
mean
of
the
all,
stories
the
are not
story
written...
about the warning, right?
Right.
So one paper has it, as a big headline. The other paper has it, U.S. advises to increased caution when visiting the Bahamas. But it's something before I get into that. This is what I want to say. Period. So in fact, I'm changing my direction.
Okay.
Okay, because I've got to redo the research first. Okay. Did I say good afternoon to everyone?
Not yet.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. All right. I'm changing my direction. I don't care what kind of warnings they place on the Bahamas, other than just like, nuclear contamination or something like that, because I don't know of any more place more dangerous than the United States of America. That's my increased warning.
Right.
Okay? So and I think most people know this.
Yeah, you could get into all sorts of trouble.
I think most people who are traveling to the United States know, you know what? If I live in New York City, there's some places I don't go at night. If I live in Miami, there's some places I don't go at night. So if I go to the Bahamas.
And if you, look a certain way or of a certain gender, you might be in even more danger.
Well, like any place else.
Yep.
If you're a woman, and I'm saying this, I'm not doing a fallacious thing, and you're wearing a trench coat, and I say that because you have a lovely trench coat on.
Thank you.
Isn't that a trench coat?
It is, yes.
It's a kind of...
It's a short one, though.
It's a stylish
yes,
trench coat.
Absolutely.
It's kind of like a high couture trench coat.
Well, I don't know about that.
Okay.
so,
Notice, by the way, how I mixed the languages, high and couture.
Yeah. Very,
so,
very good.
So if you're wearing a trench coat in the United States, and you're a woman, and you go down some areas, say of Washington D.C. alone, you may have a problem. I don't know. If you are a woman and you are hitchhiking on a lonely road in Oregon, you might have a problem.
Absolutely.
Okay? So I think that's the way it is. Okay?
Sure.
I don't think it really is relegated to one place versus the other.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So, I'm over that. Now, let's that's a commonality thing. If you're a black person and you go to the United States, anywhere, you might have a problem.
Especially if you have to have an interaction with the police. You got to be super careful. That's a reality.
You might want to get yourself a driver. Okay?
Yes.
So no, that is a real reality.
Mm-hmm.
The fact of the matter is that no matter, we're advanced, man. I saw a movie, by the way, on Netflix. No, it was on Amazon.
Okay.
Did you get your thing all
sorted out? Is that back up? No.
Call our people.
I will reach out.
Call our people, yeah. There's a movie called Marshall, and it's about Thurgood Marshall.
Okay.
I thought it was going to be about his life and times. I was very excited to see it, but it wasn't about that.
Oh.
It was about a case that he did. Because, Thurgood Marshall was kind of like a roving attorney for the NAACP.
Right.
And one case he was brought on in was a case where a black man was accused of raping a white woman in Greenwich, Connecticut, the north.
Right.
And I'll skip ahead. It turned out it was not true. It turned out that the woman, in her depression, subject of a physical, domestic abuse, poor, bad husband. He was always away. She had a couple of drinks, and the driver came to ask for some money, to borrow some money. And in a moment of weakness, the sweetness for weakness happened. or the weakness for sweetness happened. So this has occurred. Then she heard some noise. When she woke up, the man was still with her, and she panicked. So they got in the car, and the bottom line is she went all around. She literally jumped off a bridge to kind of make it look like he threw her over the bridge.
Right, to set up the whole story.
Set up the whole story. And all because she didn't want to lose her lifestyle, afraid of her husband. She was very content to accuse this man of rape. So when they asked him at the end of the trial, and this screws up the movie for everyone, why is it that you just didn't say that? Why didn't you just say that? He says, well, I'm from Louisiana. Okay? And in Louisiana, if someone accuses you of rape, a white woman, you don't say, yes, I did have sex with her. Why are you laughing at it?
Because that's true.
Okay, you don't go, yes, it's true I had sex with her.
You wouldn't get
the
past
white
the
woman.
yes.
Yeah, okay. Because then they would take off, as his words, remove my manhood from me and then string me up. That was, let's say, a pivotal point in the trial.
And what year was this?
This would have been in
In the 50s?
67, something like that. So that's a very, and so that, we progressed hopefully from that, but
Well,
you don't
I
know.
mean, I think we have progressed, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I think there's still a ways to go. You hear all these
We progressed
stories.
from the removal of the manhood.
Right.
That would have been like an automatic situation.
Right.
Whereas that isn't the situation now.
No.
But so there's a lot to be afraid of. I tell you, I'm afraid of if you have a kid who's in a high school or in college, if you go to a mall, these are places that are advisories, and these aren't like off the beaten path places.
Right.
Here you're saying to people, and this is why I'm going to contextualize it, even though they don't wish to. Not that fish fry is off the beaten path, but over the hill is off the beaten path.
Yeah, tourists don't normally venture over there anyway.
A lot of Bahamians don't venture over there. So let's be frank.
Yes.
Okay. Let's not beat around the bush. They say this as if it's that there are tourists being maimed on a daily basis. It's not the case. And so I would venture to say the context would be is, why is it that we don't have those fears about going to the United States? I have them.
Well, what is to stop our similar agency from saying?
I think we did. I think Fred Mitchell did that once.
Right. You are absolutely right. Yes, he did. He did.
You see, and I think there's always backlash, like how dare you, right?
Right.
I mean, I can tell you one thing as an example, that as a parent, you don't worry necessarily about your child being snatched here.
No.
It's just not something in our mind, right? If you're in the United States, that's on your mind.
Right. Yeah.
We'll be back in a minute. The marijuana debate continues, Erica.
I know you have great interest in this.
The cabinet is to discuss the issue. This is a big thing.
It is.
It's huge. I mean, the fact that,
They're even discussing it. I thought Minister Handfield, he said he believed that there was, could be some, he thought some consideration should be given to partly decriminalizing it, correct?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to do quantum leaps, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. We did last week, but they're not going to be quantum leaps. But the one leap you can take is not to make your child a criminal.
Right.
I'm saying that specifically to you. I'm not saying that your child, who is like 8, is engaged in this.
8 and 11. Yes.
8 and 11, right?
But you're thinking ahead.
I'm thinking ahead for you when they are 18, hanging out with the boys.
50.
50?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when they're 50, I don't know if you're going to be around to worry about that. But, let's hope so.
Yeah. Well.
So at least, listen, I'm glad to see there's some things happening. I can't, one day we'll do a show because I'm trying to get someone on who it'll be a surprise guest. But there's some things that are happening that I think you're going to hear about in the next 2 to 3 months, right? That shows we're moving in a different direction. You can't have a scenario, for instance, where year after year you're seeing your numbers slip down as far as ease of doing business. You can't have that.
No, right.
You know, you can't have, well, hopefully, and I'm not making any prediction on this, you certainly don't want to see crime numbers going up and up.
Mm-hmm.
There are just certain measures that you don't want to see, certain metrics that you want to see going in a certain direction. You want to see, things like national savings, things like less foreclosures, and of course jobs,
like
etc.
more construction.
I mean, those are the basics, right? But there's also some things that you can't quite. I mean, we have our guests on today from org, civil society. You also want to see things that you would say formulate a more progressive nation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So things like online stuff and Freedom of Information Act and integrity bills and just the way you do things.
And equal rights for women.
Yeah, basics. See, those are like basics, so you shouldn't even have to.
Right.
I mean, like I was saying, whoever deserves the credit deserves the credit. One of the people I think deserves the credit is Mr. Clarence Russell. I am hearing all over the place that if you go down to the passport office, I've heard this weekend. I heard this 4 times. 4 different people said the same exact thing without me prompting them. And that was, and I don't know why it came up this day. I think probably because Mr. Russell is being moved to immigration. And they said they went down to the passport office. They were ambivalent that it would be a decent process, right? And they went down and they applied either the day, and by the next day or the next day after, they got their passport. And here's the thing that they all said without being prompted. And the people were just hugely professional. That's what everyone said that without me. These aren't even people who know each other.
That's a big deal.
A huge deal.
I don't think that's ever been uttered before in the same sentence with passport office.
I mean, that's what they said. And so that goes to leadership, right? Now Mr. Russell is going to, you got to give to the immigration department. And these are things where, documents are required to be issued, et cetera, et cetera. And that has not been, I think, the bastion, is that the word?
It is.
Okay.
It is.
Of what we would view as efficiency.
Yeah.
Maybe there was an
opposite.
attempt to maybe professional, but certainly it's not efficient.
Yeah.
And so those are the kind of things you want to see. Those are the things that are going to change the ease of doing business by quantum leaps. So I'm kind of optimistic.
You're hopeful?
I'm hopeful. Me.
I'm happy to hear that.
I'm always pessimistically hopeful.
Right. Pessimistically hopeful.
I'm always ready for the down, the downslide.
Well, that's good news. That is good news.
Yeah.
So I hope his replacement continues.
Well, see, that's the thing, If the systems are in place, now it's on you not to let it slip.
Right.
It's like a sports dynasty, Once you get the mojo going, you don't want to, otherwise you're out. And it's easily recognizable, right?
Right.
Because you know what the benchmark is. We've now changed one thing.
Right.
And you're it. Okay. So
there's only one variable at work here.
So and also for someone coming in, it should be easier because they just now have to adopt and actually look to how they can take it up a notch.
Yeah.
That's the main thing. So we're looking forward to some changes in the new year that will change the way that we do things. So did you how did you celebrate your majority rule?
I relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
I happened to have just come back from Anagua, so I was decompressing from that.
Yeah, you
even
frowned.
If that's necessary.
You frowned. It was a compressing thing.
Every day in Anagua is like Sunday.
Slow?
Yeah, just a very chill.
Had you been there before?
vibe. No, that was my first time. I loved it. But
you
it
said
was
that in
lacking.
a way that you almost had some expertise on Anagua, in a way. Like every day in Anagua.
I know some more about it now than I did before. I knew a fair bit of the history.
Uh-huh.
But, I went birding for the first time. Very interesting activity.
What do you call that? What is it? Ornithologist? whatever it is, something with the O.
Yes, ornithology.
But bird watching is for us lay people. Yeah, or birding, which sounds a little bit more highfalutin.
And that is what I did. I went birding.
So we know that Inagua, well, we'll get back to Inagua. We know Inagua has the flamingo.
Yes.
But it has other birds?
Oh, my goodness. So over the course of 3 days, I mean, I was not able to identify but 2 birds. But the guide that I was with, we identified about 60 different species.
You have binoculars and everything?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah, it was quite...
Birds are fascinating, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that in all seriousness.
And who was the guy? Was it a Bahamian guide?
Oh, yes. He was one of the wardens from Bahamas National Trust.
Okay.
Very knowledgeable.
Do you
and
remember
very
his name?
Entertaining. His name is Casper Burrows.
That's in itself an interesting name, Casper.
Well, that's what they call him. I think his name is actually Rudolph or Randolph.
Right.
And then, of course, I met Henry Nixon, who is world famous. His family saved the flamingos and played a big
Well, I don't know
role.
that story.
Played a big role in getting the conservation effort started. And his father and his uncle were the first wardens of the park.
So did people used to eat flamingo?
Used to.
Okay, that's
They
the
call
thing.
it hush-hush meat.
Okay, but I mean,
But no, it used to be a part.
like they would just go down there and shoot them.
They would go down, they would shoot them, they would dry the meat. It was just sort of like a core, that
Yeah, it was
is
like
what
chicken,
you did.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you ever had hush hush?
No, I've
Okay.
never had hush. And I have to tip my hat. They take it very seriously. They seem to have sort of ingrained this culture among the residents that the flamingos are to be protected and
It's
taken
also
care
their
of.
livelihood to some extent. I mean, I know Morton Salt is down there, but because that's always
Yeah, there's
going
always
and coming.
something, right?
So at least, but so Matthew Town is what you would call a company town.
Correct.
You know that phraseology, right?
And it still looks like
Blocked
a
out,
company
gridded
town.
out.
Yeah, it is very well laid out. I mean, and it's been that way for a long time. Inagua used to have a larger population and be a lot more sort of economically successful than New Providence because it was in that shipping lane. But when the Panama Canal opened, all of that stopped and it
We
just
should
went
blow
downhill.
that up, hey?
So
I can't say that, right? Can I say that? Okay.
so you
For
can
the good of the country.
you
yeah.
can see remnants of that in how the town is laid out. But what's amazing is there's only one settlement, and Inagua is very large. New Providence can fit in Lake Rosa,
And that's the flamingo place.
and that is and
Okay.
that's where the that's
salt?
the salt flats, and we
Okay.
went to see those. So I had it's always something I've wanted to experience.
Would I wish to go there?
Yes,
Okay. All right. How long would I wish to be there?
be prepared.
How long would I wish to be there? Say 2-3 hours?
No,
What?
I think
Overnight?
a 2-day trip is good.
2 days.
Yeah, overnight.
Would they happen to have like a JW Marriott or anything there?
No.
Okay.
No. But you know what?
What?
Where we
Where did you
stayed,
stay? Where did you stay?
a lovely little place called Enrica's Inn. We were the only 2 people.
Mm-hmm.
We were the only 2 people there.
Did you meet Enrica?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No. And, it wasn't fancy. It was basic, but it was very clean. Amazing Wi-Fi,
Mm-hmm.
right? Free.
Okay.
And the lights went off one evening.
Mm-hmm.
Generator kicked in.
Well, if you listen,
So
if you live in a family island and you have an inn, you need to have a generator.
But I was impressed.
Okay,
No, it
all
was.
right.
But they have a couple. I think they have 3 or 4 places.
How
you
long
can
was that
stay.
flight?
It was an hour and a half.
Okay. All right.
Bahamas Air was on time,
Mm-hmm.
pretty much.
Okay.
So it was a good experience.
Yeah, so-
I think they could get more tourists
Mm-hmm.
with the right promotion, but there needs to be more for
People to do?
I mean, within that whole eco structure.
Yeah.
You could go kayaking and obviously birding
yeah.
and ATVing
Yeah.
and all this stuff, but
Yeah.
there are
someone
no
has to
companies
develop
set up.
that, though.
Exactly.
So someone has to have the economic wherewithal and the vision to set up such a kind of a sort of resort, I suppose.
Right.
That would be focused on that, and there'd be people who would come to that.
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean, if you say
absolutely.
60 species of birds, that's a lot of birds, right?
Right. I mean, apparently for people who are into that thing, it is an amazing place to go.
Mm-hmm.
If it's like a naturalist haven.
Where would be but how do we compete? And I don't know if you'd know this, but how do we compete with places like, say, Costa Rica and Panama, like a place like that? I'm assuming that those places have a lot more things going on.
Right. Yeah.
One of the things that I think has really been not the downfall, but a drawback for the Bahamas is it's flat.
Mm-hmm.
So
right.
and essentially it's kind of the tenor of the attractions.
Right.
It's just, it's flat. There's no hills. You can't, to build a zip line in the Bahamas, you literally have to put up poles.
Wow.
You think about that, right?
Right.
There's nowhere to zip line from.
Not from the top of Gladstone Road.
Or from the water tower or something like that, So it's flatness kind of, and then, it's not a, wouldn't you call those environments hostile? Shrubbery.
Right. But,
there's not a lot of trees.
No, there are not a lot of trees. The beauty, it's beautiful, but it's a stark kind of raw beauty.
So you have to be into stark raw beauty.
You have to have an appreciation.
Yeah.
It really is fascinating, though.
Okay.
It really is. And
Okay.
the trust is trying to do some things there to open it up. But, I think it's a catch-22. I think people would develop businesses if more people came, but more people aren't going to come.
Well, those things seem to be, the Bahamas seems to have the capacity, and I know because we've been investigating it over at Atlantis, the capacity to be not put those places like Inagua as the destiny, the destination,
right.
but as a part of of an overall package. So if you come to Nassau, even though it's an hour and a half away, that's not terribly far, and they only need X amount of people, right? So if you have a hotel full of Atlantis people,
right.
5,000 people, if 200 of those or 50 of those want to go to see Inagua, they would get on a plane for an hour and a half. And that's the kind of connection. Aloha Airlines in Hawaii, if you fly in and you buy a ticket on Aloha, you can go to any island free on Aloha. So, that kind of packaging, because if it's a national carrier, right, and we're already subsidizing it, if it causes economic activity down there that offsets the price of getting them there, then get them there,
Yeah. And they could use some additional economic activity.
Right.
But I think there are people who have an appreciation for that kind of experience.
Mm-hmm.
I know I enjoyed it, and I'm not a birder.
Yeah.
But now I want a pair of binoculars.
Okay. And you'll sit outside your house and watch birds. It's fascinating. I play golf. It's funny you asked me about golf, right? And I played golf yesterday. That's how I spent my MD day. And MRD day. And on the golf course, because of its water and there are
wetlands.
tons of I think I got an email from someone the other day, and I'll tell you I'm going to do this, and when we come back I'll find it, but I forget what they said. Something like I'm going to tell you right now. Hold on. On our golf course over at Paradise Island, there's something like I want to say 100. I can tell you right now. I'll tell you right now as we load up. Why am I not loading in here? But there are tons of species just on that golf course.
And they're around you often, but unless you know what you're looking for and to look, you don't see them.
You don't see it.
But we saw these owls. I love owls.
Oh, man.
Burrowing owls. So they have, and the pygmy forest, have you heard of this?
No, is that like a tiny...
Yeah, so because everything is so flat in this one particular area, the wind shear prevents the trees. They're mature, old trees. Some of those trees have been there hundreds of years, but they're ankle high. And you see...
Ankle high?
Ankle and not even mid-shin. A tree. And they kind of grow... Yeah, I have some pictures. And there are lots of owls in this area. And because they don't have tall trees to build their nests in, they burrow under the ground.
See, that's cool. That is cool.
I have
But there used to be a lot of owls in the area by Cable Beach.
They're probably
in those, and they still are snowy owls.
The barn owls.
The barn owls.
That's the proper name.
Yeah, but you also had snowy owls.
No, the barn owls are white.
Yeah, okay, but that's okay. But on that golf course, I was just saying, this is from the Bahamas National Trust. They do an annual bird count.
Right. Yep.
42 species on the golf course.
Yeah, just in that area, and the herons and the egrets.
Right.
and the black belly.
Yeah, they gave me the whole list. They got the list. It's this is the list. You got I mean, this is going to thrill people, I'm sure. But you got the great egret, the snowy egret, the heron, the green heron, the ibis, the glossy ibis, the osprey. You know the osprey is, right?
And
it's
yes,
an eagle.
We saw a couple ospreys, and they're sitting on top of these dried trees.
Yeah, they have they sit on they can make posts for them. Yeah,
and it's but you know, because of the salt and how they drain water and put water in, Morton does, they create these areas of landscape that are nothing but dead trees, but they're like driftwood. They're beautiful, and they come out of these salt ponds.
Right.
And you have these beautiful birds and the ospreys. I mean, it is beautiful.
Like you say, we take for granted a lot of what we have. We don't appreciate it.
It's different. It's not like going to Cabbage Beach or going to Pink Sands Beach in Harbor Island. This is a totally different kind of beauty.
Yeah, it's almost like going to a desert, hey?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we'll be right back. We've got our guests, Shantez Wilson and Matt Aubrey from Org, and we'll talk about some of the things that's going on in civil society and some of the pending legislation that's coming up. We'll be right back. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ed Fields here along with our guest co-host, Erica Wells. Cox Rogan is out doing her thing with Marathon Bahamas. Before we get to talking about our guests, and by the way, our guests are going to be Tennille Burrows, not Shantez. She has the cat, what did that say? Goatskin drum, conch shell, black horn, tom, do. I guess it's a Junkanoo thing. And it took me 3 things to get to that. And Matt Aubrey, who's executive director of Org. And, you know, I suppose, you know, this is a civil society discussion. And it's interesting, I was watching this whole series on World War II. And I just kept on thinking how far we've come. From, you know, settling things that way. I mean, there's still a lot of that going on, okay, and it's more technological, et cetera. But the amount of people and resources and fuel and stuff that you have to go through, I mean, that's a big commitment, man. And then the thing is, the whole thought about, well, you know what, I'm in charge of the Bahamas, but you know what, I want to get Turks and Caicos. They got some stuff down there. I want to go there and get it and take that stuff. You know, and then just go down to Cuba. That whole thing about I'm going to take over everyone. It's nuts. Anyway, speaking of which, we are talking about. Well, we're going to talk about the Integrity Commission bill of 2017, the bill that's I think getting ready to be debated anyway. But there are a couple of other bills on the table, Matt Aubrey and Tennille. There are what happened to the Freedom of Information Act? Where is that?
So the Freedom of Information Act, as you would recall, Org and We the People and Rise Bahamas and Citizens for Better Bahamas and We March and all the groups banded together and we pushed forward, and it was passed almost about a year ago by both houses, but then sat unenacted, which was confusing to everybody. Everybody didn't.
Which means the Governor General didn't sign it.
Basically, it was just sitting there in this limbo, and everybody kind of understood. So it exists, but it's not enacted. And then before the election, they did enact the part that would take away the last bill. So it would have taken away the 2012 bill, which never was enacted, but it repealed that. But they also enacted a component where they would have been able to hire the information commissioner. That was one of the issues that a lot of civil society groups were out talking about, that we felt that the information commissioner was not independent enough, that it was it should be an independent position because it represented people once they felt that they had not been able to get information through the process that was set out. And that person was to be appointed by the Prime Minister upon consultation with the Leader of Opposition. So that was enacted, but nothing ever happened on it. The election happened. The new administration came in, and we started, and a number of other groups like Citizens for Better Bahamas started having conversations in the summer around what was going on with that bill. And it really hasn't moved very far since then. We've talked to the AG. The AG has talked, and it didn't have a lot of information. It was talked about that it was going to be, further parts were going to be enacted, particularly the whistleblowers component within it, which I think would support some of the anti-corruption stuff they're looking at. But finally, what what we were told is that the AG was going to be going to London in this month and to be working with folks in London who put forward their Freedom of Information Act, and we're going to follow some of the templates and get some consultation in terms of how to do it best. Okay. But it remains a huge component, not only locally but internationally. A lot of our international partners are looking at what's going on with the Bahamas and why isn't this bill moving forward in the way it should.
So, and please, Janelle, feel free to chime in on this. The thing is with these bills, they're just inanimate objects. At the end of the day, they have to be worked by the citizens in order for it to work. And it's not just about the politicians, is it? It's about, the whole culture of the civil service. Right. I remember going in many, many years ago, this is 1982, and asking at the Ministry of Finance for the list of dog licenses. I mean, that sounds fairly benign.
That sounds like something you do, too.
Well, because we had a stray dog problem. Mm-hmm. So the thing is, we still have a stray dog problem. But, I mean, the thing is, they wouldn't give it to me. Okay, I kept on going from step to step, and I couldn't get it.
What did they cite?
There was no cite. There was like, you're not getting it.
There was a guy.
It was a state secret.
In fact, I almost got arrested because the first instance was they said that this is a public treasury function. So I went to the treasury and I said, "Can you give me the list?" And they go, "No.
They probably
you're going to have to go
list.
to the treasurer." No, they have a list. You're going to have to go to the treasurer. And so I said, "You mean of the Bahamas for the dog license?" So they said, "Yeah." So I went to the treasurer. I sat down in front of him. I'll never forget, his name was Garnett King. He goes, "I think you're going to have to ask the financial secretary for that." So this now became the story. So I went to the financial secretary and I went into the office and they wouldn't even let me. So I barged into the office. I was removed. So that was the last, So that's what I'm saying. It's at that level.
Well, I think, and we've had a chance to kind of look at this from a lot of different levels. I would say that the Organization for Responsible Governance and other civil society groups are kind of taking advantage of the fact that maybe the administration is not quite set with what it's doing and trying to get connections both within the new elected officials, but deep within civil service too, because we have to make an assessment of what's going to have to happen. Within that, though, what we see is that there's not only this perception of information and access to information is control and power, which in some degrees is a very outdated perception. You also see an issue of coordination, because at the same time where there's no movement on something like freedom of information, which would give access, what you see is that we have already signed up a loan with IDB, set up a project that's well on its way around the public finance management monitoring and public finance monitoring and public management project, that one of their indicators and one of their goals is to have a focus on a change on statistics. It's very clearly recognized that there's not the infrastructure in place to share information in the way that it needs to be. And one of their end goals is ultimately to create this open platform for data. And they talked very specifically, we were at a town hall that they were at, and they talked very specifically about they're going to look at how they can share big data. And not in line with freedom of information, but because ultimately they know they're generating these data and they're not getting any gains out of it. Yeah. And so I think the coordination and just the fact that these systems aren't working together towards an end goal that I congregate is there.
I think to be honest with you, I think it's even less complicated than that.
I think no government would really want you asking a bunch of questions. They don't want to have to provide information. Yeah. They don't want the hassle. They don't want to put the institutions in place and the mechanisms for you to be able to access the information. Right. So if Bahamians don't get more biggity and let the dogs out like you let it out in 1982, if more Bahamians don't start to say, look, we're demanding information because we have a right to it, then it wouldn't become a priority.
And the freedom of more awareness as well, though.
Yeah, but the Freedom of Information Act, I assume, essentially gives people the right to sue for it. I mean, I don't know the word is sue, but basically you have a legal right to it.
You ultimately go and you can request, and if you're told you can't get it and there are criteria why you couldn't that are set in the law, you then have the ability to go to this information commissioner, which is why that person would need to be independent, because they're going to be able to look at it and say, oh yeah, they went by what they were supposed to, or in fact, no, you are due this.
But see, that's what makes the information become available, not only what's there, but now they know they have a responsibility to compile the information.
Well, and that's a big part of it is not and we all know you don't take data the right way. Giving it out or trying to make it available is a difficult process and it requires thought and it requires strategy. And I don't think that's been a priority or something on the deck for that. And that's one of the components we also need to be involved in. So it's not just demanding, hey, this has to be, but I think it's being deeper involved in how this works, because the end user is going to be the citizen.
But Matt, why? I mean, you touched on this earlier, but what would be the reason why it would just be sitting there waiting for the Governor General to sign it?
Probably very simply the same reason why the stop sign goes up after there's been a terrible accident. Government tends to be reactive in many instances, and I think that what we've seen in many of the incoming ministers have made this observation is that the infrastructures in the ministry are not set up in a user-friendly way. There's lots of people doing things that maybe aren't aren't very functional in terms of the way they do it. That does require some thought and some overall thought. We had the benefit of sitting with the National Development Plan, Dr. Nicola Vergerolle, who's just so smart and does so many bright things, brought in and connected us with to a conference with a guy who does deliverology, if you ever heard that, in the UK. And this was, under Blair, one of the seminal components to making their government more functional. And it was a top-down, it's looking at performance monitoring, it's looking at making it performance-based in terms of why we're using objectives, using business principles as to how to run a government. And many governments are in this problem. They get into this situation where much like the Bahamas, their role is, okay, it's put upon them to fix the problems, and we sit back and we put one group in, and 5 years later we put another group in, but we don't really have a place in that, and we need to start to look at more modern opportunities. And so I think that's one of the things is we need to start to drive, not just this needs to change, but it needs to change in the right way. And the Integrity Commission, which we'll talk about that in a bit, but it's a huge bill. It's 110 pages, but if you look through it, it talks and speaks a lot about how this would benefit folks on the outside. Not necessarily it talks a lot about how investigations and holding people accountable, but it also talks about public education, because public education and involvement is critical to good governance.
I think, one of the things that I kind of balk at, I'm in the group where a lot of these circles, and I just sit and watch the back and forth, because there's a lot of talking. It's very basic. Until people, and this is, and I say this with in defense of civil society, because civil society is a minority of people. When I say that, I mean obviously it's all of us, but the formal organizations are a minority of people, and they talk, and there's a lot of stuff going on. But until people care, so what happens in the United States and other places is that everyone has something going on that affects them. They have this culture of knowledge or being able to react to something, and they have mechanisms to react to it. We sit in an environment where we will go into a government organization or an environment, and something that is basic, that happens every single day, we don't question why it happens. We don't even know why it happens. We just do it.
We are well trained and complicit. I mean, I think decades upon decades of conditioning have caused us to be as docile as we are. So when governments see activists and advocates starting to flex their muscles and fight for their rights and do all these sorts of things, they look at us as though we're crazy. And this is just totally unexpected, but it's happening not out of any, orchestrated effort, but really out of necessity. During the last administration, you were mentioning how many different issues people are faced with as a citizenry. We couldn't catch ourselves to latch on to one particular thing. When you latch on to one thing, something else go on and hit the fan.
All right. But I think, and the problem is that the government is able to see government. People, I just think they have this whole different view of what government is. Government is a reaction. It is a reaction. It isn't a proactive. Government is never going to be proactive. Never. The government that you have is the government that you want. Okay? And if people who over the last, since 1973 or 1967, has been so content, because they were getting their cars and their Mercedes and their flat screens and all that, they ain't checking for the fact that you have to fill a thing out 3 times. who cares? I just want to get my car, and if it takes me what I have to go through to get it, fine.
But it's about building a culture of that level of awareness
Right.
and wanting to see a change, and that takes time, and there needs to be an awareness. The general public needs to be told or shown, I guess.
And I think
this is what you do.
When you draw from, you go to the U.S. and these things happen. They didn't always happen.
No, of course not. No.
And it happened at a certain stage. And I remember I was in New York in the late 80s and early 90s, and the city was about as corrupt a place as you could imagine. I mean, the local government that was in place and the way that the city worked were terrible. I mean, they were losing money hand over fist, and you couldn't do a thing unless you had a guy. Like you had and we know that culture here, right? We think about investments. So they made a major investment, if anybody's gone, to road traffic, right? So road traffic from, going through the pages books where somebody would sign you up and you go to another person with lots of books and there was no record. Well, now they've invested, and if you go over there, certain parts of it move quickly like clockwork. I went over, I had to do something where it took me a long period of time, and I went through probably 10 different people because what I was trying to do was a little more complex. And within those 10 different people, they figured me in the system, they gave me a keyword, I went over here, I was able to pay. Within that process, there was one of those 10 people who kind of leaned over to me and said, I need $20. Kind of invented that this wasn't going to work, and they still needed to. And I said, I worked for an organization that's not going to be the case.
We got to take a break, and we'll be right back. All right, we've got Tennille Burrows. Tennille. Candidate Tennille. Former candidate Tennille. Got the little fro going.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Where's yours?
I could show it to you.
It's on your chin.
I could show it to you.
Did you used to have a big afro?
Yes, man.
Yeah?
I'll show it to you before we go.
Okay.
We're here with Matt Aubrey from Org and Tennille, who's also with Org. You're there. Tell me what you are there. You're some title. You have a title.
No.
You have a title.
I'm the engagement coordinator.
An engagement coordinator.
Which is perfect because civil society is, like you said, getting there, and we need to focus on them to some extent.
And I think maybe before we do this, because we're going to have time to do this, is, this whole issue of civil society, because, I think it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And we come on and we talk about it, and as if everyone just grasps it. I mean, there's actually an organization called Civil Society, Bahamas, and then there's civil society generally, of which many organizations are made of. But what we did notice, and people like Renard Henfield, I think, was sort of, I know with We the People, we were kind of on the, beginning of it. But I think what Renard Henfield did was really kind of, I suppose accelerate it. A lot of people had been working on this stuff before, but maybe give it a little boost because people were fed up. That's basically it. People were fed up. It's like the Boston Tea Party thing,
Collective unrest.
Collective fed upness, and so, but again, what it showed was how confused and really immature we were as far as civil society in terms of how to really,
but if you think
focus and all that. But we grew.
We talk about government being in place and being in power and being structured, and they have difficulties coordinating, coming to some sort of a consensus. One department works different than another. The priorities are different. Well, civil society, which is much less further developed, we're in that stage. We're growing up, and part of it is we do need to build on this. And I think understanding that there's going to be disputes on which way you go, what tactic you take. But understanding that we are a sector, and a sector that's important and influential on every level of our international connections, whether it be IDB, World Bank, OECD, the CARICOM. They're all talking about the fact that civil society needs to grow up and play a bigger role here.
Now, let me take away from the United States. In more developed countries, civil society, I think, works a little easier than it does here simply because it's so vast, these developed countries, that people can carve out their niche and focus really, almost microscopically on something that they do, right? So the Audubon Society, they're focusing on birds or whatever the heck it is. This one is doing, that's not a civil society organization, but everyone has their thing. The environmentalists, someone's focused on whales, someone's focused on that. Whereas here, because of the size, a lot of people are focusing on the same thing. There's overlap, right?
I think that's a key point. And what we're going through is not unique to the Bahamas. I mean, a lot of other. I worked for an international hunger relief organization. We were in places like South Sudan and Democratic Republic of Congo and even in Haiti. And you saw that civil society has this process of growing up, and it goes through this where everybody's kind of mixed and milled and they're a little scattered. But you start to think about how does a business sector define itself? And so we need to go through that process. So one of the things we've been talking about with a number of other groups is putting together a proper civil society conclave, a place where we can kind of talk not about one particular issue or another, but how do we work better? How do we grow up? We need to be better funded. We need to have better human resources. We need to be able to better define ourselves and say, here's all the environmental groups and here's what they're going to set as a coalition, and here's all the governance groups, and here's all the child development or community development groups.
But the thing that
we don't even have a register to understand it. We did a straw poll over the summer, had an intern working on stuff for us, and we came up with about 350 civil society organizations, and then we found another list that had another 150 on top of that. So we don't even have a register of that speaks to like we can define who we are or standards.
Right. The point I was trying to really make, though, in that regard, that it's even scarier with the numbers you have, is that, and I'm going to be frank, I've said it, and I'll say it again, I have nothing to lose, is that I find when you go to these type of scenarios in this type of market, is that because there is a kind of vested positioning or interest or whatever the deal is, territorialism, however you want to describe it, that what happens is, and I think that government benefits from this, right? Bad government benefits from it. When civil society groups are kind of positioning for, ownership of something, that it actually takes away from being able to achieve what needs to be achieved, because everyone's just jostling for position and power and whatever the word is.
I think that's the case in many scenarios, but I think if it's towards an ultimate and strategic effort, part of that works. You want to build. I mean, think about the similar in a business environment. You want healthy competition to drive up innovation, to bring best products, best practices forward. We as a civil society group, basically, the four of us could say, hey, you know what? We're a new group, and we just set it up, and we're going to be the group X. There's no regulations, there's no requirement, there's no standards. We haven't come up and said, okay, here's what our collective responsibility are. Here's how we can organize ourselves. Here's how we can just understand how better we can communicate and share resources. Part of that is the fact that we have this play. There's nothing gained by us being the organization of the day or another organization getting more status or more, unless you're trying to do something. All these organizations that come out here.
I get all of that, but I'm going basic. See, this is where I'm talking about the talk, right? I get that.
When you want basic.
Say again?
Talk to me when you want basic.
Yeah, I get all of the NGO jargon. I get all of that, right? I'm talking about this. People like power. And when you want to forward an idea, when you want to coalesce all of the interests to go to one point, that this, power thing stops the unification of coalescing. That's the possibility of coalescing toward one goal. You find that instead of having 50 people going in one point, you have 50 people going in all kinds of directions, and actually maybe even undermining you simply for their own good. That's what I'm talking about.
That exists, I think, but I think that exists in the minority. I don't know to what extent.
I mean, it's changed over the years. Like, there's no doubt about it in the last 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah, but I think you have a lot of different. Let's say, for example, the environmental groups. You could BNT, Brief, Nature Conservancy. You have a mix of local and international agencies that exist. I think fundamentally they might have particular priority interests in terms of campaigns that they're pushing, but at the end of the day, they will be well served to come together and figure out strategically how they would want to prioritize policy or issues that they want the government to look at and stuff like that. This is what we're trying to see happen as org in terms of facilitating better civil society collaboration and I guess systematic movements towards policy and recommendations and things like that. And I think it's achievable. We just have to get to the place where we're ready to work.
I mean, just to take it away from org, right? Take it away from civil society. I'll give you an example. You've got in this country a baseball, and I'm saying it, and they can come and dispute all they want. Baseball
stadium.
Okay, no, forget the stadium. Yeah, I think it's called the Bahamas Baseball Federation or something like that. Yeah. And because a group of people want to maintain power, why? Because you get to go to things. You know, you get to go to like the baseball Olympics or whatever the heck
But
it
when you
is they
look
go
at
to.
civil society, we're not getting those benefits. The folks that are out there
I'm
are
not
doing
talking.
so without any.
Let me finish the point I'm making. The point I'm making is because of this internal zeal for these power bases, right? You know what hasn't advanced? Baseball. Because everyone's fighting for their little regime. The thing that hasn't benefited is baseball. So you know you know that there's hardly any, and I don't know if it's changed, and your people would know this stuff. There's hardly any team that can go abroad that has been sanctioned by the Bahamas Baseball Federation because one other group of people are not with this group and blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. That's what I'm talking about, taking it out of the civil.
Right. So,
I didn't want to.
But how do you coalesce that?
And
then?
I guess that's what Org is trying to.
Well, I think that's not only Org, I think a lot of us, and I think that's what we see is the differences, the fractures that you see at this point. I think they're more around who thinks this is the best way to proceed, not who's sitting on this fiefdom or kingdom or that. I don't see a lot of that, honestly. We talk to folks on a regular basis, and people are struggling. They're doing a lot of this stuff as the volunteer effort that they do after their second job. They're up nights, they're out weekends, they're going to these types of things. This is what civil society makes up. That list of 350 are very few of them have put themselves in a position, well, this is just a thing to make myself good and it's a status. Most of them are saying we need to change, and we've all agreed that, but I don't think we've directed what kind of change and where that change can be, and that's part of it. We can have different directions. With all honesty, social change happens because you do have some crusaders, but you also have people who plod along. You have people who come and use fact-based things versus more of an emotional take. We need to sort that out, but that's the majority of the folks that are out there looking to make these changes. Organizing ourselves is the key component.
I think civil society participation is very important at this stage of our development as a people, because a lot of individuals, the citizenry, wonders and contemplates and ponders, how exactly do I become active? How exactly do I take part? And an easy referral is choose some cause, choose some civil society group that you believe in, donate, volunteer, send in recommendations, do whatever actions they ask of you. That's the way to actually now get the citizenry involved, is I think through civil society as a vehicle.
But I think the success of a group like We March, per se, was that, in my recollection, it was one of the first civil society groups that managed to broaden its audience. It became a catch-all. It was relatable to a lot of people, and I think that in the past, and I know that this is changing, civil society groups were made up mostly of like businessmen and lawyers, and they didn't have a lot of general public involvement.
It was the intelligentsia.
She mean Rotary and Kiwanis and Toastmasters.
No.
I'm not talking about. No.
Don't call no names.
No, I was. No, she said they were like these little small think tanks, like the NASA Institute. You know, I mean, they're worthy parts of civil society. It's just that it wasn't a grassroots type of
It wasn't
movement.
accessible. A lot people didn't understand. Right. It didn't. Well, in some respects, it wasn't accessible. It wasn't relatable. They didn't make it relevant. Right. So, I mean, I think obviously that is changing.
Well, I think there's a couple of things, and some of it comes. I mean, some of our values come out of a very practical space. We realize that this is not a sprint; it's a marathon. Things are so complex that we actually work in 3, almost now 4 spaces. We work on accountable governance, we work on education reform, and we work on economic development. Because when you look around, these not only related, but you can't work on one and expect the other things are not gonna happen once you fix that. You do the laws at the same time. We're losing all of our kids with our education system. You work on that, and then they don't have opportunities to work as they come out of that. So you got to work on economic development, and ultimately civil society has to play this role. So we work on that. But we want to make sure that things are sustainable. That's going to be the key part. Passion can drive a lot of things, but you need the capacity of sustainability to make sure that we see these things through. So we work on how do we organize as, how can we get folks to be giving resources? How can we tap into funding opportunities? How can we get positions where people have either paid staff or well-structured volunteers that can make sure sure that they meet the need. And this is key. I think Hands for Hunger is done a great job towards sustainability. They got they found a real niche with the Paradise Plates initiative, but at the same time they figured out how they can work with the other groups out there and make sure how they build on the space and do that. But they're going to need, like everyone, more opportunities, more funding, more connection, more resources, so that when policies and practices line up, that they're considered, not just that they're scrambling after the fact.
Yeah. It's a difficult thing. I mean, I think that people, and we'll segue into this Integrity Commission bill, but I think people, what I've learned personally from it, is that one of the difficulties is that people really are looking for someone to do it for them. So you'll find that you can get emotion. There are some issues, there's some moments in time when there's enough emotion that you'll see people take to the streets, right? The Boston Tea Party. There are other times, though, that it's almost like beyond them, when it's not at that level, right? Like, when we come back and we talk about this Integrity Commissions bill, I will make a bet that one of the biggest challenges you have is getting the general public to be emotional toward it, or they've had town meetings with the Freedom of Information Act. I mean, these are not thousands of people showing up, so it's a very difficult thing. It's very hard to get people talk about marijuana. Everyone shows up. We'll be right back. Along with Erica Wells Cox.
You forgot, didn't you?
I was going to say Rogan Smith. She's off dealing with Marathon Bahamas. Matt Aubrey is with us, along with Tennille, the engagement director at org. Let's make a shift. I mean, the point I was trying to make in the beginning was for people to know about the fact that there are people out there fighting every day for change, because that's what this is about, for change. It is fraught with complications internally, externally, but they press on. They press on, and I think I can tell you this. I started We the People back in 2011, I think it was 2010. There have been many organizations before that. Unicom. Believe me, from the beginning, there's been activists. But I think now, more than anything else, and at any other time, there's been a kind of growth in civil society organizations that, maybe it's a marketing thing, this civil society thing. Maybe it's the wrong, thing. I think activism is really the thing that is happening, because we weren't advocates or activists.
It has to do with the ease of access to information too. People know more because there are more sort of platforms for it. So I think that has a lot to do.
Social media.
Yeah, that has a lot to do with getting people involved. It's just people being aware of what is going on and to make them realize, like you said earlier, why should I care? What does this have to do with me? How is this going to make my life better? Because at the end of the day, like you said, Ed, that's what people are concerned about.
That's what people are concerned about.
I think we've learned to speak up. People calling into the radio talk shows,
well, that's been,
people posting on Facebook, but now it's like, how do we make a concerted effort to actually effect change
other
through
than
more,
just talking?
Through more, far-reaching sort of tools. Like a petition has impact. When that goes to the Attorney General's inbox and it's like 700 of them, that has impact. Marching has impact in a certain way from an optic standpoint. International agencies watch our media. So when they see on the front page a group of people protesting something, it has an impact. So I don't think people realize that talking is fine, pontificating is fine. But at the end of the day, we have to actually utilize these other tools that actually have further reaching impact.
I think also to line them up. I mean, and I think Tennille said to learn. We've learned, right? So this is an education process as well. And what we realize is it can't just be the handful of folks that are leading these organizations. It's ultimately we got to be able to connect it to people living over the hill, people in the Family Islands, people that are ultimately dealing with the issues that really this impacts. The unemployment, the crime, the issues that we're faced with, the environmental issues, they ultimately hit those people that are the most vulnerable hardest. And so we need to give them the tools and the knowledge to get involved.
So let's speak to how the Integrity Commission bill of 2017 is going to impact, and I'm not saying that facetiously, I'm asking the question, how it's going to impact people to the point where it's not something that's being negotiated from from civil society to government, as opposed to government feels the need and the necessity to put this in for the betterment of Bahamians.
Well, I think one thing we learned with the outrage regarding the public disclosure breaches over the decades is that Bahamians at large, not those who benefit from corruption, but the majority of Bahamians don't want to feel as though the political elite is in a separate class than us, and that
they're on a special list for
they're exempt from this,
BC?
that, and the other. So I think this is a paramount component of the Integrity Commission bill that seeks to regulate and prevent parliamentarians and public servants from appreciating access that we don't have, or taking advantage of resources that they shouldn't have access to themselves. So with the Public Disclosure Act, though, I think that's something that we've seen totally abused and misused and underutilized over the past decades. It's been on the books for maybe almost 40 years now, and now we see it's about to possibly, through this bill, be repealed, which I think is a get-out-of-jail-free card for those members of Parliament who we learned more recently are actually currently in breach of that act.
Well, maybe so, but let me ask you a question. This is, and I don't want to go down the Disclosure Act line, because the reality is we haven't been abiding by it for 40 years or whatever the hell it was, which means it's nothingness. Okay. And I say I don't mean nothingness. I don't mean nothingness, i.e. we shouldn't have one. But it's nothingness because we've not been abiding by it.
No, because the leader of the opposition and the prime minister have done nothingness to enforce that law. That's what it is.
The
it's not us.
citizens haven't done anything to enforce the law.
Well, I would venture to say that in recent years, Bahamian citizens have been speaking about it, and protests were held related to accountability, citing public disclosure and international outreach in terms of finding ways for us to enforce these laws that are on the book to level the playing field.
I know the efforts that people have made. I'm saying that the Bahamian people
in mass, get you,
don't give a damn. Okay. So that's because if they do, the same impact that I'm just going to throw it out, the same impact that today I can look in the newspaper and in 2018 I see this thing that I thought I would never see, cabinet to discuss marijuana issue. Obviously, someone feels that this is a big deal that they need to think about. I'm not saying, cabinet to discuss the Disclosure Act, because no one seems to care. They think, okay, Erica, she rich, she in Parliament, this one poor, he making money. That's how they think of things. How do you change it?
I have this love-hate relationship with foreign input, because on one hand, foreign is not better when it comes to talents and skills and capabilities. But on the other hand, we know that other jurisdictions have sensible anti-corruption and integrity existing legislation in place, and they know how to enforce it. So when it comes to the United Nations and the Organization of American States and all these other bodies that we have signed on to, we have to utilize their influence to come back to the Bahamas and say, hey, check out this marijuana thing. Hey, check out this anti-corruption thing. So we as Bahamians have to not be paranoid like, oh, these international agencies come and mess with us and tell us what they want us to do. We need to realize that this is what we as a country signed on to.
This is
to the person, right? So we talk about corruption. Corruption is extremely expensive. It affects our ease of doing business. It takes business away. We waste millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars on the government side. When you think about how that relates to our national debt, because we keep having to borrow this international money that we pay more for. When you look at the national debt, and I think that's even more now, we were looking at those numbers in the summer. Every Bahamian would owe $17,000 themselves, personally, from the youngest to the oldest, to have to pay back our national debt. And it's grown since. And we've got to think about how that relates to the individual. That's going to be part of how we get people on board. The Integrity Commission bill, though, ultimately this is what is used across the world and in our region, places that have done this well, to set up a body, an independent body, that then looks at and monitors this. When you talk about the public disclosure bill, we had in our structure basically a commission that was gathered and then ultimately brought it back to the same folks it was looking at to be able to get permission to be able to bring that information forward to the public. Well, the commission, if it's done right, ultimately has the capacity to not only investigate matters of corruption, oversee public disclosure, ensure that and evaluate what goes on in government to ensure that corrupt practices are pushed out and that changes are made, and at the end, which you talked about, Ed, which is public education to change the culture. And this body has a lot of latitude and a lot of power within it. So this is a huge bill. It's 110 pages in total.
How does this benchmark against the standard integrity? Because I wasn't even aware of such a thing before this thing came out.
So and you see it in places like Trinidad's had it for 30 years. You see it in other places. In Turks and Caicos has a commission in place, and a lot of that commission was taken as an example of this. The commissions, when they're around the world, they have kind of three different versions. One which is really about just investigation. The second, which is more about consultation and advisement, and they look at practices. But the third is what we have, and that's an amalgam of all of that. And it's been recognized as one of the best structures. We looked and we benchmarked this bill against Jamaica, against Canada, the UK. We looked at Turks and Caicos and Trinidad, and we balanced it out. And a lot of what's in this bill are in those places, in that space.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. This is just completely off the wall now. So I look at the Turks and Caicos and I look at Nigeria, and you say they've had I don't know how long Turks and Caicos have had it, but I know if you say Nigeria has had it for a long time.
No, very recently.
Okay,
very recently.
Trinidad and Tobago, you said it had it for what?
For 30 years.
Has it made an impact? I mean, I'm just asking.
Right.
I don't know, because I hear a lot about people building airports and, corruption.
It is not, by no means is it going to be the silver bullet. It starts you, though. It gives you laws that then if this is done right, you can follow it up. We had a chance, Ian Strawn had the Democracy Conference at University of Bahamas this summer, and we were part of that. And we had a benefit to meet and talk to the head of the Trinidad Integrity Commission bill. And he talked about the fact that this stuff is tough. He's like, this was a retired Supreme Court justice, and he talked about how difficult this process is and that you need to keep working at it. He talked about places like our island. I mean, think about Trinidad, how much bigger it is. They have issues with things like whistleblowers because everybody knows everybody. Think about us. We're only 400,000. We all know each other, too. So it's something we've got to work at. But the legislation, it's not going to fix it and all of a sudden it passes and everything's great. It gets us in the door. And that's what we have to start. This is going to be a long-term change to say we have the right kind of legislation. We have a system that allows the visual support of the public. We have to then empower the public and engage them to be involved in this and ultimately look at how we can change this. It's not going to be quick.
You're asking about the impact, but who knows? Who's to say it wouldn't be much further reaching implications if it hadn't been in place when it was put in place. I think of the work that civil society does, an institution like Hands for Hunger, for example, and I look at the statistics related to hunger and poverty in the Bahamas, and I think, if Great Commission Ministries and Hands for Hunger and the Feeding Network didn't exist to alleviate some of the burden from the government, what statistics would we have to show today? How many people would be starving and hungry and impoverished to that extent?
Yeah, I'm going to say something to you off the air about that. But
okay.
Just interesting thing, because I don't want to cast any. Because they're doing great work. See, the thing is with these things is they always fill a vacuum. I know of, for instance, an organization that, I can say that I don't have a lot of faith in that organization. I'm saying this, very generically, because I think that someone may be benefiting from that particular organization, but they also do the work.
That's just an example. Look at the environmental groups. Suppose we didn't have them around. Right. I'm saying if we didn't have specific
you have to have them.
agencies to focus on these things outside of government that are independent, we would be in a probably catastrophic state.
I mean, and this is where I suppose what this does at the very basic thing is, like you say, we didn't have a protocol in place to deal with someone if they're caught being corrupt. You're just kind of like, hey, you're corrupt, we don't like you anymore. Now there's some teeth maybe that has some prescription for, going to jail or whatever it is. Okay?
And there's prevention, detection, and enforcement components, as well as public education.
So where are we status-wise with this bill? I mean,
so we've been pushing.
And what are the flaws? Before we get it, what are some of the flaws that you see in terms of this bill? Because one of the things, and I'm going to just say this, one of the things, and you've seen my comments on these things, is that, yes, I know, we seem to always seek perfection. And in the seeking of perfection, we end up with zero. where are we in terms of, we should, where you would be happy to say, okay, this is a bill, it's in place, now we got to just work in the future to tweak it.
And let me say the first component we see is it's a huge bill. That's not against it. I mean, it includes a very comprehensive code of conduct that will be in law that relates to how folks are not only supposed to avoid corruption, but to do their jobs in terms of, how you use your state given vehicle, how you deal with your expenses, how you use your phones and your emails, things that are make sense. And now we finally got a tabulation on it. So all those things are great. One of the biggest issues we see is that org has been, and there's a few other organizations like CBB that have been looking at this, the Bar Association, but it hasn't yet got to that point where a lot of folks have looked at it. A lot of the public says, I should pay attention to it. Part of it is this is a huge thing to look at. Who has 4 hours to read through this thing? So we took.
Well, are you really going to get a lot of people looking for that?
I think there's a population here that will be involved. I don't think it's everybody, but I think a lot more people can look at this, and people ultimately need to look at it from the user standpoint.
I mean, in fact, to the point that you're successful as civil society, isn't the public going to basically be relying on you to look at it? They don't want to look at it. That's what we have Tennille and Matt for.
No,
but
that's, you have Tennille, Matt, Diane, Chris, and
whoever.
You have us to summarize it for you and spoon feed a little. Like, that's been done already. So if you go to org.bahamas.com/anti-corruption, you'll be able to access the summary. If you don't have the wherewithal to go through 100 pages, we've pretty much chopped it up and given you that. That's our role. Right. But we don't want to say exclude the general public.
No. I would never say that.
Because it's accessibility.
I'm just saying I'm doing the opposite. I'm not saying you're excluding it. I know you want to include them. Right. They don't want to be included.
I wouldn't say that.
I'm being. No, that's a basic tenet that I'm going to be. Let's be factual. The reality is, if they wanted to be, you would have zero problems with funding. I'm just telling you that's the way it is. It's not
but it's not a matter of intent. You know what? I'm choosing because I got to struggle on my 2 jobs. I can't pay my BEC bill. I can't get a bank account, as you well know. All those things, they become the static that creates people not getting involved in issues like this. So part of that is what we have to work at is how do we make this as accessible as possible? And that's part of what role we feel civil society can be. We shouldn't be the de facto council that says this is what everybody wants. We have to make sure that there are steps to find out what is it that everybody wants.
No. Let me add to Neil's point. What I say is this: when I don't post a lot anymore. I've kind of moved away from that. When I post the issue of banks, okay, just to give you an example, it lights up. Why? Every single person is impacted by it on a daily basis. They care about it, but guess what? They're still not agitating. This is something that literally impacts them every single day. They will make a comment. Pardon?
There is one.
But
you mean in mass?
Yeah, in mass. Yeah,
you think this in mass agitation has happened?
No, that's what I'm. But that's the point I'm making to you.
Maybe they can afford it.
Wanting to read and people depend, and this is why, as you said, organizations like yourself are so necessary. Because if you didn't have those organizations, the general public would just let it happen. Would just let things happen.
Even though they admit it's detrimental, they don't have the audacity to either move their account, agitate for a change, or
they're on the line.
Change.
They're on the line. Okay. And by the way, not only they're on the line, when they move, they go to another line.
But a big part of that too is they don't know how to do it. Right. They don't have the time.
One guy on the line, he said, Erica, sorry. He said he got 3 people from the line, from the front. I got to go to work.
Our education system is not creating critical thinkers. It's not creating. We don't set folks up from birth to say, okay, well, you need to start to be independent. You need to start move against these things. A lot of that is supported.
You got to know that $15 getting charged from your account when you have to cash
to do something about it.
Anybody
to do something about it.
Yes. People will do something about it.
How many people are doing something about it? That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying, these are people.
But no,
you put it
they
on
don't
the
know
individual.
how.
The truth is
they would do it. They just don't know how.
But that's part of it, is finding out how do you do this in a way that you can find the time, that you don't have to sit and try and wait in line for 2 hours at the bank.
But people don't even, I think a lot of people don't even know that there is something wrong with that. I mean, I think we are dealing with things at at a higher level than we realize. People, they don't know what questions to ask. Right. They don't know that there is anything wrong with it, and they don't know what to do if they do think that anything's wrong with it. That's why these civil society organizations are so important.
And that's what Tennille was saying. I mean, I'm supporting your point about why these things are required in our society, because if there were a vacuum, if there was nothingness, then this would not happen. Because most people, someone once said to me a term that I'm never going to forget when I was explaining a problem. You know what they said? I don't have the head space for that. Mm-hmm. Okay? Their life is, chock-a-block with a lot of things. Like the rest, 80% of the world, they get up in the morning and they look for food. That's what they do. They don't have time to be worrying about, the corruption in Somalia. They want some food. So this is the thing about human beings, okay? And that's why I implore you as an organization, and that's why I get a kind of little, this kind of weird feeling, because it is very highbrow. It's very highbrow, okay? And that's good when you're dealing with the people who you need to negotiate with. Mm-hmm. But you got to understand in the translation of that, okay, to the general public, the highbrow doesn't translate.
Right.
The and I say this, and I didn't mean to be offensive. The NGO jargon, that's what I call it, doesn't translate to the guy on the street. You got to say, why are you paying $15 for that? You don't have to.
Right, and why it's wrong. In journalism, Ed, you would remember this, when you decide what your lead is going to be, or the subject of your story, the first question they teach you to ask is, why do I care? Right. Why does anybody care about what I'm writing about? And that is the key question. And a lot of people don't even know that they should care.
Yeah.
And you know what? You have a good point, because org has kind of like one tier that deals with this, policy, advocacy, committees and all that. And then we have another tier which is more along the Campaign 242. So if you go to campaign242.org, you could see where we're more involved with grassroots level activities. One of which is something called Freedom Schools, which was started in the civil rights era. And it was essentially just a crash course presentation that was made to citizens about their civil rights and democracy, system of government, that sort of thing. So we have one presentation in place now that we would go to different groups if they're requesting this sort of presentation, or to different constituencies or town hall meetings. And we're going to build off of that this year and actually flesh out some of the topics to go into more detailed curriculum of sorts.
Because we're out of time, but just out of interest, what are you doing in schools? Like, do you go to schools and at the grade 13 level or whatever it is?
We're doing a whole work on education to help change that, but ultimately the Freedom Schools right now are focused on communities. Okay. We want to get to folks that can put this to practice. And basically, what is our government system? What is your role? How would you actually work? We even give people a chance to write a letter or send an email, or show the skills of the basic part of civic education, which we don't give them. So part of that is how do we do that? And to quickly jump into the Integrity Bill. The Integrity Bill, we have a brief that's about 5 pages that talks about, and some of the recommendations that we have really are, we see that the commission that's set up, there's going to be 7 folks, 2 of which should come from civil society, others, but most of it is related to the Prime Minister having a big power of appointment. Okay. So we need independence for something like this to work.
Listen, we're going to have to invite you back to get more into the meat of it. It was a good conversation. It's important work, and we really appreciate the fact that you guys are out there doing it. Ken, we'll see you on Monday. Erica, thank you very much. Tennille, see ya. Matt, we'll see you. We'll see you soon.